June 11th, 2025, 350 miles northwest of St. Helena Island, the South Atlantic Ocean. The MV Christina Debora was alone, utterly, completely alone. The 38.77-meter standby safety vessel, built in 1981 and designed to protect other ships, now needed protection itself. The 7-person crew faced a nightmare scenario. No engine power, dwindling food supplies, fresh water running dangerously low, and the nearest land, a tiny speck of an island in the vast Atlantic, was impossibly far away. How does a vessel designed for safety end up stranded in one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth? How do experienced mariners find themselves helpless, adrift, at the mercy of currents and winds? This is the story of the Christina Debora, a story of mechanical failure, desperate communications, international rescue coordination, and the unforgiving nature of the sea. The ordeal had begun at least 3 days before that urgent call for help on June 11th. The clutch pack, a critical component connecting the engine to the propeller, had failed catastrophically. Without it, the engine was useless. The ship could generate power for lights and communications, but it couldn't move. It couldn't steer. It couldn't navigate. It could only drift. For 3 days, the crew had tried everything: temporary repairs, improvised solutions, anything to get the propeller turning again. Nothing worked, and with each passing hour, they drifted further from shipping lanes, further from help, further into the emptiness of the South Atlantic. On the afternoon of June 11th, the situation became critical enough that the captain made a decision. He sent an urgent request for private assistance. This wasn't a formal distress call yet, not a Mayday, but it was a clear signal that the Christina Debora needed help, and soon. The message reached contacts who immediately understood the gravity of the situation. A ship adrift 350 miles from the nearest land, 7 people on board, supplies running low, no propulsion. This was serious. Direct communication was established with the vessel to confirm the details. Yes, the situation was genuine. Yes, they desperately needed assistance. Yes, time was running out. Attempts were made to contact St. Helena Island authorities. St. Helena, one of the most remote inhabited islands on Earth, sits in the middle of the South Atlantic. It's a British territory with a population of just over 4,000 people. The island has limited capabilities for maritime rescue. No large Coast Guard vessels, no helicopters with sufficient range, and the Christina Debora was 350 miles away, well beyond any immediate help the island could provide. So the search began for alternative solutions: merchant vessels, ships that might be passing through the area, anyone who could divert course, rendezvous with the Christina Debora, and provide assistance. The coordination involved the vessel's owners, agents, maritime support teams, and anyone with connections to ships operating in the South Atlantic. Meanwhile, on the Christina Debora, the crew rationed their remaining supplies. They conserved water. They ate sparingly. They maintained their equipment. They kept watch, and they waited, drifting, hoping someone would come. 3 days of coordination, 3 days of desperate searching for any vessel that could help. 3 days of the Christina Debora drifting further into the Atlantic. By June 14th, a full week after the clutch initially failed, hope arrived in the form of a massive cargo ship. The ARETI.GR, a geared bulk carrier measuring 199.98 meters, nearly 200 meters long, a giant compared to the 38-meter Christina Debora. The ARETI had been sailing from Baltimore, Maryland to Mundra, India, a journey of thousands of miles. But when the call came that a vessel was in distress, the captain made the decision to divert. At 2300 hours UTC on June 14th, under calm conditions, a rare blessing in the South Atlantic, the ARETI.GR successfully rendezvoused with the Christina Debora. The two vessels came alongside each other in the middle of the ocean. The crew of the Christina Debora must have felt overwhelming relief. After days of isolation, uncertainty, and dwindling hope, salvation had arrived. Critical supplies were transferred: fresh water, food, and most importantly, the repair parts needed to fix the clutch. The crew of the ARETI.GR worked efficiently. By 23:30 hours. Just 30 minutes after arrival, the transfer was complete. The ARETI.GR departed, resuming its journey to India, leaving behind 7 grateful sailors and a ship that might, finally, be able to move again. There was also another potential rescuer. The sailing vessel bark Europa had departed St. Helena, ready to assist if needed, but with the ARETI's successful intervention, the Europa was stood down. The maritime community had rallied. Help had come. The crew of the Christina Debora set to work on repairs, optimistic that within 24 hours they could make temporary fixes and limp to St. Helena for a permanent solution. For 5 days the crew worked on those repairs. 5 days of mechanical work in difficult conditions. Working on a drifting vessel in the middle of the ocean is challenging. Every tool must be secured. Every part must be carefully handled. The ship rocks with the swells. There's no stable platform, no workshop, no easy access to additional supplies if something goes wrong. But they persevered. They followed procedures. They did everything right. On June 19th, the morning of June 19th, devastating news. The temporary clutch repair had failed again. After all that work, after all that hope, after supplies had been delivered and plans had been made, the clutch wouldn't hold. The Christina Debora was still powerless, still drifting, and now the situation was becoming desperate again. Golden, but this time there was an additional factor: the weather. In the South Atlantic, conditions can change rapidly. What had been calm seas during the ARETI rendezvous were now deteriorating. Wind was picking up. Swells were growing. Storm systems were approaching. A drifting vessel in calm conditions is manageable. A drifting vessel in a storm is a death trap. The captain made the decision. No more trying to save the ship. It was time to save the crew. A formal distress call was executed. This wasn't a request for assistance. This wasn't asking for spare parts. This was a Mayday. 7 people in immediate danger. Vessel disabled and helpless in deteriorating weather. Emergency evacuation required. The distress call went to MRC Natal, the Maritime Rescue Coordination Center in Brazil. MRC Natal responded immediately. They sent urgent electronic messages to all merchant vessels in the area. 2 ships were identified as potential rescuers: the MV Theseus and the LPG tanker Aquamarine Progress. Both were asked, could they divert? Could they rescue 7 people from a disabled vessel in increasingly rough seas? The MV Theseus responded first. A massive container carrier, 368.99 meters long, almost 3 football fields in length. The ship was en route from Baltimore, USA to Port Klang, Indonesia, a journey of thousands of miles. But the captain didn't hesitate. When lives are at sea, mariners help mariners. It's an unwritten law of the ocean. You stop. You assist. You save lives when you can. The Theseus adjusted course toward the Christina Debora's position, but this wasn't going to be a simple pickup. Evacuating 7 people from a small vessel to a giant container ship in rough seas is extraordinarily dangerous. Container ships sit high in the water. Their decks can be 20, 30, even 40 meters above the waterline. Getting people from a small boat up to that height requires careful planning, proper equipment, and favorable conditions. And the conditions were not favorable. The captain of the Theseus assessed the situation and sent a message to the Christina Debora. Be ready for disembarkation upon arrival. Prepare yourselves. Gather essential personal items. Prepare emergency equipment. Be ready to abandon ship quickly if necessary. The crew of the Christina Debora began their preparations. After 14 days of fighting to save their vessel, they were going to leave her behind. Imagine that moment. You've spent 2 weeks on a drifting ship, 2 weeks of rationing food and water, 2 weeks of trying repairs, 2 weeks of hope and disappointment. And now you're preparing to leave, to abandon the vessel you've worked so hard to save. The Christina Debora had been their home, their workplace, their sanctuary, in the middle of the ocean, and now they would leave her to drift alone. On the evening of June 22nd, estimates suggest early evening, the rescue operation began. The exact details of how the evacuation was conducted aren't publicly recorded, but we can imagine what it must have been like. The Theseus approaching carefully, her massive hull creating a lee, a protected area of calmer water. The Christina Debora bobbing in the swells, tiny next to the giant container ship. Ropes or pilot ladders deployed, one by one, 7 crew members climbing, being lifted, or being transferred to safety. And then they were aboard. 7 exhausted, relieved sailors on the deck of the MV Theseus. After 14 days of ordeal, drifting, rationing, hoping, despairing, working, trying, and finally abandoning their ship, they were safe. The Theseus crew welcomed them, provided food, water, showers, clean clothes, beds, the basic comforts that had become precious luxuries during their time adrift. The captain of the Theseus made another decision. His original destination was Port Klang, Indonesia, still weeks away, but these 7 people needed to get home. They needed medical evaluation. They needed to contact families who must have been worried sick. So the Theseus adjusted course for Cape Town, South Africa, a major port with excellent facilities, a place where the crew of the Christina Debora could be properly cared for and arrangements made for their repatriation. The journey to Cape Town took 7 days, 7 days for the crew to decompress, to process what they'd been through, to tell their stories to the Theseus crew, to eat proper meals, to sleep in stable bunks without the constant rolling of a drifting vessel, to slowly transition from survival mode back to normal life. The crew of the Theseus, themselves experienced mariners, understood what these 7 had endured. The sea tests everyone eventually. These 7 had faced their test and survived. On June 29th, at 0700 hours South African time, the MV Theseus arrived at Cape Town. Port Control sent a tender named Condor to meet the vessel. The 7 crew members of the Christina Debora were transferred to the tender, their final boat ride in this ordeal. The Condor brought them to shore, to solid ground, to the end of their nightmare, after 2 weeks at sea, after drifting helplessly, after failed repairs and deteriorating weather. After abandoning their ship, they were home. Not their home, perhaps, but on land, safe, alive. But what of the Christina Debora herself? The vessel that had been abandoned in the South Atlantic. She continued drifting, alone now, empty, her automatic identification system, transmitting a status that mariners understand with a chill, not under command. Enuki, It means the vessel cannot maneuver, cannot be controlled, is a hazard to navigation. It's one of the most ominous statuses a ship can broadcast. The Christina Debora, 38.77 meters of steel and machinery, drifted through the South Atlantic. Wind and currents pushed her in directions only the ocean understands. She might drift for months, for years even, until she eventually founders in a storm, taking on water through hatches left open during the evacuation, or until she drifts into a shipping lane and is hit by another vessel, or until someone, a salvage company perhaps, decides she's worth recovering. As of the last reports, her status was unknown. Somewhere in the Atlantic, possibly still drifting, possibly sunk. The Christina Debora exists as a ghost ship, a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong at sea. A vessel designed to ensure the safety of others, now herself a potential hazard. There's a sad poetry in that. The protector needing protection, the guardian left unguarded. Built in 1981, 44 years of service, IMO number 7931064, the Christina Debora had spent decades as a standby safety vessel, watching over offshore operations, ready to rescue workers from oil platforms if emergencies occurred. She'd performed her duty faithfully, and then, on what should have been a routine transit, a clutch pack failed. One component, one mechanical failure, and everything changed. This story highlights something crucial about maritime safety. The ocean is unforgiving. It doesn't care about your experience. It doesn't care about your vessel's history of service. It doesn't care about good maintenance or careful planning. When something goes wrong at sea, hundreds of miles from land, you are utterly dependent on the goodwill and capability of others. The Christina Debora incident demonstrated the best of maritime cooperation, multiple entities working together to save 7 lives. The initial contacts who received the distress request and didn't ignore it, the coordinators who reached out to every possible resource, the ARETI.GR, which diverted from its commercial route to deliver supplies, the bark Europa, standing ready to assist, Maritime Natal in Brazil, coordinating rescue efforts, the MV Theseus, changing course to pick up 7 strangers, and the port of Cape Town, facilitating their safe arrival. No one involved in this rescue was obligated to help. Legally, yes. There are maritime laws about assisting vessels in distress, but the reality is more complex. Commercial vessels operate on tight schedules. Every hour of deviation costs money. Fuel, port fees, delayed cargo. Yet captains and shipping companies regularly choose to help because there's a code, an understanding among those who go to sea. Today you help someone, tomorrow someone helps you. We're all vulnerable out here. We all depend on each other. Think about the captain of the ARETI.GR, sailing from Baltimore to India. How much did that detour cost in fuel and time? Think about the captain of the Theseus, bound for Indonesia but diverting to Cape Town. How did that affect schedules? Cargo delivery times? Yet they did it, without hesitation, because 7 people needed help. The South Atlantic is one of the most remote stretches of ocean on Earth. St. Helena Island, the nearest land to where the Christina Debora drifted, is itself one of the most isolated inhabited places on the planet. The island is famous for being Napoleon's final place of exile. He died there in 1821, trapped on a speck of land surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. The crew of the Christina Debora understood that isolation. For 14 days, they experienced what it means to be truly alone. Modern technology helps. Satellite communications meant they could call for help. Yes, transponders meant other ships could see their position. Coordination centers could orchestrate rescues across vast distances. But technology can't overcome the fundamental challenge. The ocean is huge and ships are small. Even with all our satellites and radios and GPS systems, finding help in the middle of the South Atlantic takes time. Days. Sometimes weeks. The crew must have watched the horizon constantly during those 14 days, hoping to see another vessel, any vessel. When you're drifting, every ship is a potential lifeline. But in the South Atlantic, you can drift for days without seeing another soul. The major shipping lanes are far to the north, connecting Europe and the Americas to Asia and Australia. The southern routes are less traveled, more isolated, more dangerous. Weather in the South Atlantic can be extreme. The region is known for powerful storms, the roaring 40s. Latitudes between 40 and 50 degrees south are notorious among sailors. Constant westerly winds, massive swells, few land masses to break up storm systems. The Christina Debora was fortunate that calm conditions prevailed during the ARETI rendezvous. But by June 19th, when the weather began deteriorating, the situation became life-threatening. A drifting vessel in a South Atlantic storm is in grave danger. The story of the MV Christina Debora is both terrifying and inspiring. Terrifying because it shows how vulnerable we are at sea, how one mechanical failure can strand experienced mariners hundreds of miles from help, how quickly situations can deteriorate, how the ocean, beautiful as it is, remains fundamentally hostile to human life. We are visitors there, temporary guests, and when things go wrong, we're reminded that we don't belong. But the story is also inspiring. 7 people survived. They kept their heads during a crisis. They rationed supplies. They attempted repairs. They called for help. They cooperated with rescuers. They made it home. And they made it home because strangers helped them. Ships diverted from their routes. Crews went out of their way. Coordination centers worked tirelessly. The maritime community demonstrated what it means to have each other's backs. And what of the Christina Debora herself? After being abandoned in the South Atlantic, she drifted for months, 350 miles northwest of St. Helena, then caught by currents, carried thousands of miles across the Atlantic. Wind and water pushing her relentlessly westward, an empty ghost ship broadcasting her not under command status to anyone monitoring maritime traffic. For months she wandered the ocean alone. Until recently, very recently, the Christina Debora has been discovered, run aground on a reef near Sam Lords in Barbados. The 38.7-meter vessel, after her incredible journey across the South Atlantic, finally came to rest on the eastern coast of the Caribbean island. She drifted approximately 2,500 miles from where she was abandoned. 2,500 miles of open ocean, through storms and calms, through shipping lanes and empty waters, until the currents and winds brought her to Barbados. Local authorities in Barbados are now dealing with the grounded vessel. She sits on the reef, battered by her months at sea, a hazard to navigation, a salvage challenge. The vessel that spent over 4 decades protecting others now needs to be removed, dismantled, or salvaged. Her final resting place, far from where she was built, far from where she served, and far from where her crew abandoned her, is a Caribbean reef, an unexpected end to an unexpected journey. The discovery brings closure to one question: where did the Christina Debora end up? But it raises others. What damage did she cause to the reef? What environmental impact will her presence have? Can she be salvaged? Will she be broken up where she sits? Or will she remain there, a monument to the power of ocean currents and the unpredictability of drifting vessels? For the 7 crew members who endured those 14 days, the news of their ship's discovery must be bittersweet. They survived. They're home with their families. But the vessel they fought so hard to save, the vessel they finally had to abandon, has completed a journey they never could have imagined. From the South Atlantic to the Caribbean, from a failed clutch to a Barbados reef, the Christina Debora's final voyage was one she made entirely alone. This is their story, the story of the MV Christina Debora, a standby safety vessel that needed saving. 7 people who drifted for 2 weeks in the South Atlantic, the maritime community that refused to let them drift alone, and a ghost ship that traveled thousands of miles across the ocean to find her final resting place on a Caribbean reef. The sea may be unforgiving, but humanity at sea can be remarkably compassionate, and that makes all the difference. Thank you for listening to this episode of Sleepy Mysteries. The story of the MV Christina Debora is a powerful reminder of both the dangers of the sea and the strength of maritime cooperation. While this ordeal ended successfully, with all 7 crew members rescued safely, the ship's subsequent journey across the Atlantic to Barbados shows just how far and how long vessels can drift when abandoned at sea. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to Sleepy Mysteries. We bring you true stories of maritime disasters, unexplained phenomena, historical mysteries, and modern-day ordeals that test human courage and resilience. Hit that like button if you appreciate stories of survival and maritime rescue, and leave a comment. Have you ever been in a situation where you were stranded or needed emergency help? How did that experience change you? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Check out our other mysteries as well, from the vanishing of MH370 to the disappearance of Madeleine McCann, from the Devil's Footprints to the haunting of Jennifer Patterson. Each story is thoroughly researched and told with respect for those who lived through these experiences. The Christina Debora's crew survived their ordeal. They're home now, safe with their families. And their ship, after an incredible 2,500-mile journey across the Atlantic, now sits on a reef in Barbados, a ghost vessel that found land, just not the land anyone expected. A reminder that the ocean gives and takes according to its own rules, and that when we venture onto the water, we're all just visitors in a realm that will never truly be ours to control. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and remember, every gesture of help can make all the difference. This has been Sleepy Mysteries.